without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker. Dean Gary Segura of UCLA Luskin will be leading today's discussion, and Attorney General Xavier Becerra. Thank you so much for joining us today after what was a contentious night last night. I hope you're all doing well, and thanks again for being here.
How are you this morning?
Dean, I'm doing well. I'm still alive and still breathing, so that's good. I hope everyone else is as well.
I hope you got more sleep last night than I did.
I actually did. In fact, I told everyone who asked to get some rest early. We wouldn't know results from the election for a while, not even probably the next morning, as I assumed. And so it's still going to be a while. You can still sleep well tonight as well, I think.
Yeah. Well, that happened, and so I guess we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that you're working on in your official capacity as Attorney General. But I did want to give you the floor up front and say anything you want to share with us about the events of the last couple of days, or your perception of where the U.S. electoral process is from a legal standpoint and from an organizational standpoint.
Dean, thank you very much, and to the Los Angeles World Affairs Council, thank you as well for letting me be part of this program. Let me just bottle it into a few quick points. First, I think it's great. America voted. We voted in greater numbers than we typically are accustomed to seeing. That's good. It's still kind of scary that with as good a vote as we saw come out for this election, that still means close to 30 to 40% of eligible voters didn't vote. And so we have work to do, but it's at least a sign that we're on the right track. Secondly, I think it's important to say something that most of the viewers here will understand. California transcends any election, it transcends any politician, and it will continue to be the economic engine for the country. It will continue to be the 5th largest economy in the world. And so regardless of what happens around us, we set our destiny. Final point I'll make, I am a proud American. I know everyone who's watching, it feels they're a proud American as well. I will say this, I am confounded. I am seriously disturbed by what I see in the way America is behaving, especially given that Donald Trump appears so close to a second term. I think Joe Biden will ultimately prevail once all the votes are counted. But it is disturbing that it is so close given the nature of this human being and how he has conducted himself officially as the President of the United States. Period. Let me stop.
That's actually a great segue, because the first substantive question I wanted to ask you was really about your role as Attorney General over these last several years. So I don't think it's a secret or particularly partisan to observe that California's values and laws are often in conflict with President Trump's. And as a consequence, the state has litigated a huge array of administration policies. The Muslim ban, the so-called Muslim ban, the census questions, the National Emergency Declaration, emission and cafe standards for cars, action against sanctuary cities. How many times have you sued the Trump administration?
Well, the actual number is about 104 times that we've had to take Donald Trump to court, but I look at it a little differently, Gary. There are 104 times where California has caught Donald Trump red-handed violating the law. Mm-hmm. And in order to stop him from doing that, we've had to sue the Trump administration 104 times.
So the first question is tongue-in-cheek. If all the vote counting stopped now, Vice President Biden would be the president-elect. Whatever would you do with your time?
It is tongue-in-cheek. We're going to keep busy. The Attorney General in California, as I mentioned, the 5th largest economy in the world, we're always going to have work here at the Department of Justice. We are continuing our work to settle the opioids crisis and bring relief to our various local jurisdictions to help families that were harmed by those who participated in making opioids an addictive and very prevalent drug. We continue to do our work to keep the healthcare system moving so that everyone has access to it and that it is a competitive industry. There are any number of things that I could tell you about that we're doing that go well beyond the 104 lawsuits that we had to engage in to prevent Donald Trump from backsliding on America. But I will say this, if it is a President Joe Biden, I can guarantee you that many of those 104 lawsuits will dissipate or disappear, and we will be able to move forward with a partner in the federal government again.
So I think historians are going to spend a lot of time studying this period of time in our history. And again, we don't know what the outcome will be, and we certainly all agree that we want every vote counted. If it turns out that the president is confined to one term and Vice President Biden becomes the president-elect, when you look back at the last 4 years, some of the effects might be ephemeral, but some of them might be permanent or long-lasting. What do you think the most important effects of the last 4 years are on the American nation, the American polity?
We have lost 4 years in addressing the climate crisis, and Mother Nature is not going to give us those years back. And so we're in dire need to move aggressively in the opposite direction. Today, formally, the Trump administration is removing America from the Paris Climate Accords. And so you can see the devastation being wrought by an administration that has closed its eyes to the fact that in the West, wildfires are burning up many of our communities. Floods are ravishing, are devastating a lot of the South. Hurricanes, we ran out of letters in the alphabet to count the hurricanes hitting the East Coast, and super tornadoes are now hitting the Midwest. And so Donald Trump and his administration have closed their eyes to that, and Mother Nature is not going to be very forgiving in that. That will continue. Innovation, we continue to be the home base for most of innovation in this country and the world. That's not going to change. We graduate more people from college than any other place in America. That's not going to change. Somehow California can lead in both high tech and manufacturing, agriculture and clean energy, hospitality, and in trade. And so what you see is a very dynamic economy, which will keep California strong for a long time. And we do it while we respect everyone who gives effort in this state, including immigrants.
That's great. Very clear answer. I want to check in with you on a couple of things that you've actually worked on, and one of them is Daca. California and its partners won a high court rejection of a Trump administration attempt to roll back Daca as a ruling that they failed to follow the Administrative Procedures Act. There was a set of orders issued, but despite that victory, the Trump administration has really dragged its feet and actually not really implemented any of the Supreme Court's order. Where are we with respect to that litigation? What's the next step?
Yeah, doesn't that sound eerily like what we're hearing about the U.S. Postal Service not following a federal court order, that it makes sure that all ballots that were arriving at its stations be dispersed to the registrars in the various counties throughout the country? Once again, it looks like this administration is taking matters into its own hands, even though a court has ordered it to follow the law. And so hopefully with regard to the ballots, they'll get in and get counted the way they should. And hopefully with regard to Daca, which California, we took the administration to the Supreme Court, and our team at the Department of Justice secured a victory defending the Daca program. And again, here the Trump administration has refused to move forward with the Supreme Court's to protect Daca recipients. And so now we've had to sue the Trump administration again. As I've said, we go to court against Donald Trump not because it's easy or it's fun. We go to court because we must, to protect our people, our values, and our resources. And with regard to Daca, we'll do the same thing. No one expected us to win the first time. We went all the way up to the Supreme Court. We're going to do it again, and I suspect we'll have the same result.
Well, best of luck on that. The next big issue is also coming up just next week, and that's the Affordable Care Act. And oral arguments are scheduled, I believe, for November 10th. What is, the court's already ruled on the Affordable Care Act once, but then this very legally innovative strategy for a challenge made its way back to the court. And I wonder if you could let us all know what's in store for both oral arguments and how you think this case shakes itself out.
I'll see how much of a sneak preview I can give you, but here, once again, California is taking the lead. Just as in Daca, we went to the Supreme Court with the Affordable Care Act. Having worked on the Affordable Care Act when I was in Congress, I had a sense about some of the things that this administration might try to do to undermine its implementation. I asked my team to move quickly to intervene in the case. We didn't file the case. This was a case actually filed by Texas to undermine the Affordable Care Act. The administration was supposed to defend the Affordable Care Act because the federal government defends its laws. We didn't expect that they'd do a very good job, so we asked the court to let us intervene in the case because we wanted someone to defend the Affordable Care Act. We were granted that intervention motion, and that's how we got in. So next week, we will be before the Supreme Court on behalf of everyone, not just Californians, on behalf of everyone, arguing to defend the Affordable Care Act. As you said, Gary, the court has already ruled, the Supreme Court has already ruled before that the ACA is constitutional. We believe that they should move in that direction again. And simply because in 2017, in December 2017, Congress moved on a bill that was a tax measure. Remember the tax break bill that was passed in 2017? It included a provision that zeroed out the individual mandate, the amount that people who choose not to secure insurance would have to pay essentially as the price for not being responsible and getting their own insurance coverage. Because that was zeroed out by Republicans, they now argue that that made the entire Affordable Care Act unconstitutional. Protections against pre-existing conditions should be thrown out. The new protections for preventative care for seniors under Medicare should be thrown out. The protection seniors get so they can pay less for prescription drugs under Medicare, that should be thrown out. The protection for kids, for young adult children under 26, on their parents' insurance policy until they turn 26, that should be thrown out. All those things, the argument Texas and other conservative states, along with the Trump administration, are now making is that because they zeroed out in 2017 in a tax measure, the individual mandate fee, that all of a sudden everything else should go. And so we hope that there's common sense that will prevail in the Supreme Court, and once again that they will find the ACA constitutional.
Well, of course, it's really shocking with the stakes, right? So 20 to 24 million people could lose health insurance in the middle of a pandemic, not just on a regular Tuesday or whatever, right? So it seems like the stakes would be high, not just for California, but nationwide.
Well, it is not, by the way, it's not just the 20 to 24 million people who would lose their insurance. It's the 133 million people who have pre-existing conditions, and with COVID could get those pre-existing conditions could flare and cause them real problems, or COVID, after you've survived it, could become or considered a pre-existing condition by an insurance company. And if you're no longer protected in securing or keeping your insurance as a result of any pre-existing condition, you could lose your insurance as a result of COVID.
Sure, we have increasing evidence that the infection is not just a one-time thing, but causes heart and lung damage that could have long-lasting impacts on health. This is also a health-related matter, but it's a little bit more in the environment, and that's your defense of the California emission standards. So California for many years has had emission standards that are more stringent than the federal government's. And this was important for two reasons. One is we had a terrible smog problem in the 60s and 70s, and we worked to correct it. But the second is that 22 other states follow us. And so our emission standards actually kind of set the bar for the auto industry. We are able to set those emission standards through a waiver, which has now been denied us, which is what brought you into court. So can you give us an update on where we stand on emission standards? And obviously, if we have a change of president, some of this stuff will go away. But in the event that we don't, where are we on that case?
Yeah, so there's a thread that runs through all these cases where we've had to sue the Trump administration, including the Clean Car Standards lawsuit. And that's this. This is 2020, not 1920. And so California isn't interested in trying to go back to 1920 when women were still fighting for the right to vote, when we didn't think about what pollution would do to our kids' lungs. It's a different day, and we're not interested in going back to 1920. And so on emission standards, the reason so many parts of the nation have joined California in its higher standards is because they want to make sure that kids aren't born with asthma the way 1 in every 4 children in the Central Valley of California are these days. And so we are defending what not only is common sense, but what is legally justified given what's been done under the Clean Air Act and the various times that the federal government has provided with California the permission, the waiver to move forward in the way it has. And so more than 50 times, California has sought and secured waivers. Never once have we had them yanked back. Never once have they been stonewalled or rejected. And so we think we're going to move forward there as well. And it's another lawsuit where we believe will prevail.
Okay. I want to move a little closer to home, California law. So some decades ago, California adopted its own version of the Voting Rights Act. The CVRA came under challenge arising from a municipal case in Los Angeles County. And my understanding is it has now been appealed all the way to the state Supreme Court. And I'm wondering what the Attorney General's position, the official position of the state, is in defending the CVRA, and kind of what you think is at stake in this issue. Because as you know, there are still counties, school districts, municipalities, and special districts where people of color have effectively no representation despite very large population shares. So this is something I work on, as I think you know. So it's a personal thing for me. So I'm kind of interested to hear your thoughts on the California Voting Rights Act.
Right, and I believe, Gary, if we give a little bit more detail here, we're talking about a provision in our law now that says that every California voter should have his or her vote count. And in some jurisdictions where you had at-large elections, for example, a city that had 7 council members, all of them elected by the city at large instead of by councilmatic districts, in many cases, the evidence was showing that communities within that city were being disenfranchised because it was impossible or very difficult for them to overcome the hurdles to elect people of their choice. And so our laws now require certain jurisdictions to actually move towards elections based on districts, not at-large elections. We have defended the law successfully to date, and we will vigorously continue to defend people's right to vote and be counted. We're going through that right now in 2020, where we have a president who's saying he doesn't want all ballots of voters in America to be counted. We believe every ballot that is legitimately filed with the proper jurisdiction should be counted and should have an impact. And so we're going to continue to defend California's laws.
That's great. So my last question to you is another kind of hot button one, and that is police reform. You are the chief law enforcement officer of the state of California. There has been a nationwide debate for quite some time, but especially over the last 6 months or so, regarding rethinking and restructuring how we fund police, whether we fund police, at what level, the use of force by police, questions of lethality, questions of immunity that the police sometimes receive. And this is often with respect to communities of color, particularly African Americans. So we have the victims like Breonna Taylor, for example, an EMT asleep in her apartment who's shot to death. Getting arrests, indictments, and convictions in these cases nationwide has proven to be very difficult to do. So what reforms of police practice do you support to reduce unnecessary and unjust loss of life? And what would you say is a bridge too far that you would not actually support?
So good question, and I'll reflect back, and some of this is on our website, so you could always go back to see it. Back, I believe it was in May or June, right around the time that the George Floyd incident was very fresh on people's minds. We put out a bulletin at the Department of Justice. I asked my team to pull together all the different reforms that we were advocating for and work that we were, or projects we were working on with the legislature to move forward on police reform. And that we issued, as I said, late May or June, and you can see that on our website. But let me encapsulate it for you. It dealt essentially with 3 different areas of reform. First, improve use of force procedures with our police departments. Secondly, address bias in policing. And third, increase accountability and transparency in the way law enforcement does its work. More specifically, on, for example, use of force, we talked about the requirement or the need to make sure that officers are intervening to stop excessive force, the need to ban chokeholds, and we go a little farther at the Department of Justice than the measure that was passed into law recently in the legislature, where we believe that we should review and restrict body positioning, which would cut off blood or air circulation where it's possible, so that we go beyond just chokeholds. We talked about de-escalation, so that before you use the ultimate use of force, a weapon, your service arm, you have tried to de-escalate the situation where you can. Proportionality. You should not be using deadly force if you don't think there's deadly force that could be used by a suspect. Verbal warnings. You should always make sure your officers are giving verbal warnings, so it's clear that they are being given commands. You ban shooting from or at moving vehicles. Deadly force as a last resort. Something that oftentimes folks don't really think about too much is the use of canine. Instead of using a canine to actually inflict harm, we believe we should start moving towards the procedure where we're using canine to essentially find and detain without the use of the more harmful force that a canine can inflict, to try to help law enforcement where possible. That's just a number of things. There are others that I could mention. We're engaged in reform efforts right now with the San Francisco Police Department, with the Vallejo Police Department, with the we just finished a measure, an effort with the Stockton School District's Police Department. We're engaged in a pattern and practice investigation with the Bakersfield and Police Department and Kern County Sheriff's Department. We're working right now on an investigation and oversight of the Los Angeles Police Department on its use of its Cal gang system. And so we're engaged in a number of efforts right now. And everyone, I think, is familiar with the effort we engaged in with Sacramento PD after the shooting of Stephon Clark back in 2018. Many of the reforms that I've just mentioned came from our work where we reviewed the Sacramento Police Department's practices and procedures and issued a report within about a year of that commencing that investigation.
That's very helpful. There's a related issue, and it has to do with the number of people we lock up in California. And part of that is a disproportionate number of police citizen contacts are with people who are homeless, who are experiencing mental health challenges, or in some cases, both. And so there have been some rueful jokes by homeless advocates that the LA County lockup is the world's most expensive homeless shelter. And or mental health support facility. And so I wonder if you have thoughts about how we divert people from incarceration to treatment, from incarceration to supportive housing, how we can decriminalize being poverty-stricken in California.
And here, Gary, I think most folks in law enforcement, most people's surprise, will agree that you should not be having peace officers be the first ones responding when there are matters of homelessness, unless it's a clear criminal activity at hand. But guess what happens? If you see something and it disturbs you, homeless person, whether it's because of some criminal activity or simply because something about it sets you at unease, when you call, who do you call? You call 911, and guess who responds? It's not a mental health worker. It's not a substance abuse prevention worker. It's not a public health worker. It's not a social worker. It's your local police department. Mm-hmm. I defy you to find me where in the police academy our cadets are trained to be social workers, mental health workers, and the rest. And so people should not be surprised that oftentimes the outcome of some of these encounters turns sour. That doesn't excuse them. I'm simply saying, let's recognize that we have a hand in making the situation for homeless worse when we try to address it first and foremost as first responders with our police departments. And so either we, and I've said this, by the way, to chiefs and sheriffs throughout the state of California, that law enforcement has to come together to come up with a policy to make it clear. You want us to address homelessness? It's not going to always be in the best way. Partner us with those workers in mental health, social work, substance abuse, great. or let them become the first responders, and we're available if it becomes a more difficult situation. But let's be honest. We're asking officers to do far more than what they learned at the academy, and that's not fair. And if I could just segue just briefly, if you want to go into it more on this whole issue of defunding police, I want my family to be safe. I respect the work that's done every day by men and women in uniform. I will go after those who have engaged in improper conduct in that uniform. They owe the public a higher level of service because they are public servants with charges to do things that others can't. But we need them. We need to train them well, but we have to respect the work that they have to do, and we shouldn't make it tougher. And so let's understand that we all want to be safe. We all want to prevent crime, and I'm all for that. Back in 1993, I voted against the crime bill and was attacked at being soft on crime because it did not include a prevention element within the apprehension and detention and incarceration elements. And so I'm all for that. But let's not make it look like it's a simple thing like defunding police.
Is there maybe a more constructive way to think about this rather than defund versus kind of struggle with the way things are now? So as you know, I train social workers, and whether it's social workers or teachers or nurses, huge scads of professionals in California are required to undergo in-service training, certain amount of hours a year, learning new topics, degrees are required, et cetera. Could we use a combination of hiring standards and in-service training for law enforcement to equip them, not ask them to do something that they've never been taught before, but in fact teach them?
So Gary, that's one model. I'd say that's a less efficient model than making sure you get the right person who is expert in that area to go and be the first responder, than trying to teach as a side course or as an ancillary part of their training a peace officer to also do social work, mental health work, substance abuse work. I don't think that would be as effective. It was Frederick Douglass who said, "It's easier to build strong children than repair broken men." And my sense is the real solution here is to make far greater investments when that individual is still a tot, still young, before we let that individual, that child grow up to be a troubled adolescent and then perhaps a homeless adult. When you think about how much we spend to address these subjects, we just had a couple of initiatives on the ballot in the last few elections to try to deal with homelessness and the high cost of housing, rental housing. We're trying to figure this out. We haven't yet done it. And I would say to you that the more that we get a child to become an able-bodied adult, less likely we're going to have someone who becomes homeless or troubled youth who becomes involved in criminal activity. And it just is far more inexpensive. And the final thing I'll mention is this, if you don't think it's true. If I were to say to you that young, troubled, mostly boys, oftentimes, unfortunately, boys of color, Latino, African American, too often. If I were to say to you, give me some extra resources to put into this child who we see is starting to go in the wrong direction, how much can I save you? Well, I can tell you right away that 1 year of that young man or that minor getting into trouble and having to spend 1 year in a youth, essentially a youth prison, a youth facility, because they're not called prisons, a youth facility, but essentially detained for a year, would pay for 8 years of education at UC Berkeley, undergraduate and graduate school. We're just not willing to make the investments up front. Frederick Douglass was right. Better to build strong children.
Well, on that we agree, although I would hope he would aspire to higher than Berkeley, like UCLA, for example.
So I was being gracious. I went to Stanford, so I thought I was,
Yes, I know. I used to teach there. So our hosts at the World Affairs Council and Town Hall are going to moderate questions because our audience are just anxious to get in and ask you what they're worried about or what they're thinking about. And so I'm going to turn it over to the World Affairs Council to moderate our discussion. Jessica.
Thank you so much, Dean. Attorney General. We're getting a lot of questions, so we'll try to get to as many of those as we can as they relate to the work of the Attorney General's office. Our first question, does the California AG have any capability to sue another state for issues which impact California, ranging from pollution to POTUS vote counting?
We do, but it's limited. It has to be a cause of action that relates to a harm that's being inflicted on our state. And so we can sue in our state if some other state is doing us harm within our state. If we're trying to stop a state from doing something to us and we try to go into a different jurisdiction, federal or into that state's jurisdiction, it's a little bit more difficult. On the federal level, we have to show that the state is violating either the Constitution or certain federal statutes in engaging in activity that's harming the state of California. So it's rather limited. We can't get into another state's affairs. We can't say that if a particular state doesn't allow all its voters' ballots to be counted, that's going to impact California, because we'll end up with a president who really is trying to stick it to the state of California. I don't think the courts or any judge would say, write in a decision saying this, Texas is trying to stick it to California and we're going to stop them from doing that. No, I don't think that'll work.
Thank you so much. Can you help clarify AB 3088, the Tenant Relief Act?
Ooh, you're going to be sorely disappointed, because I'm thrilled that people think I know so much that I can remember what AB 3088 was, but I can't tell you I do. Tenant Relief Act, it probably sounds like it was one of our measures to deal with maybe rent control, but I apologize. If I had more information, I could tell you.
Okay, this is a follow-up question to that. So will there be a waiver of the outstanding amounts owed by tenants to landlords? Many can't afford to pay these amounts back.
Okay, so if we're talking about COVID-related emergency orders and activities that were taken by the legislature to protect people's housing, including tenants, renters, what I can tell you is that any executive order to date that Governor Newsom has issued, the Department of Justice has had a role in defending in court. We have prevailed. And so to this date, the courts, including the California Supreme Court, have weighed in favor of the actions that Governor Newsom has taken to protect Californians. It'd be hard for me to go beyond that unless I know specifics. And since we don't know where the next move might lie with the governor and any executive orders.
Thank you. Do you think there is any way to remove unconscious bias in the writings of the titles for propositions on the ballot?
Okay, you're not gonna like this answer, or maybe you will. We believe we do that at the California Department of Justice. We have I got to tell you, the team we have that goes through these initiatives. If you try to read the initiatives, I'm not talking about the ballot summary, because we get 100 words to try to summarize what every initiative says. We can't go over 100 words. And in fact, in the ballot itself, in the ballot pamphlet, we only get about 37 words. So it's even more condensed. But what I will tell you is this: we avoid buzzwords. We avoid loaded words. We try not to, if I say Prop 13, I know what you think of. We can't use words like Prop 13, Prop 209, Prop 187, because it conjures up certain images that may not be accurately reflecting what the initiative says. We have to try to use common language, common sense language. Oftentimes people don't like it. People don't like it because they don't think we're telling folks the full story behind it. We're trying to tell you the story we could tell you, in whether it's 100 words when you first get the initiative to sign to see if it'll qualify, or the 37 or so words we get when it has to be written into your ballot pamphlet. It is tough. Take any one of those initiatives. If you still have that pamphlet, take a look at the entire actual initiative language, not the summary that we provide, the initiative, then see what you can do in 37 words. It's tough. Can someone do it more impartially? Name someone for me. Is there anyone who's not political? Not a soul. There are 9 people on the U.S. Supreme Court, and I guarantee you, they are as political as you and me. They just don't show it. And the Department of Justice and our team, we all have our idiosyncrasies and leanings, but we try to remove those. And I believe the way we write these things is a clear testament to the work that's done by our team to try to reflect what the initiative said. It's not our fault that the initiative says certain things. We just try to repeat what it says in 37 words.
Thank you. Many local law enforcement agencies do not seem to understand the concept of structural racism and continue to refer to bad apples. Procedural justice training seems more performative than transformative, and civilian oversight commissions are not noticeably effective. What do you think is the most important measure of police reform that should be implemented?
Well, and I'm going to try to dig a little bit into this one because there's a larger answer. This says I'm about to be signed out. Alex, I don't know why that's there. Windows will shut. It says it's going to shut me down in 10 minutes. Anyway, let me go ahead and keep answering. Probably the most important thing we can do in reform, so it's lasting, is accountability. Making sure that everyone in law enforcement knows the buck stops with them at some point. You're the cop on the beat, or you're the chief or sheriff of your agency. Accountability. There has to be transparency and accountability in what we do, especially because we are so public facing. And so I'd say anything that moves us towards more accountability would be good. And quite honestly, the legislature is taking us in that direction. But here's what I will say. Things don't happen overnight. If there are biases or biases that some of our officers have, I guarantee you in many cases, they're implicit. They're not aware in many cases because things have been done certain ways for the longest time. Let me give you a real quick example, and it's not so much in law enforcement. I had a case come before me. I don't recall the full name of the gentleman. Ellis. If you Google Ellis, you'll find this case. The gentleman who was convicted of serious crimes. It took several trials, but he was finally convicted of serious crimes. Turns out the attorney who represented Mr. Ellis, who was black, was an avowed racist. The question before the court, in which we now had to defend the conviction, was whether or not Mr. Ellis could receive a fair trial under our Constitution because of his counsel being a racist against African Americans, an avowed racist. There's a rule essentially that governs in jurisprudence that unless you can show that that racism by your attorney was particular to you, somehow it affected his defense of your case, that racism wouldn't show a case of ineffective counsel, which would be a violation of the U.S. Constitution. I scratched my head when I got that case from my team and said, how do we defend this case? If this guy was an avowed racist, how am I to believe that he would ever really try his hardest to defend Mr. Ellis the right way? And they said, well, the rule is, unless you can show that his counsel did something in particular that showed that he was racist against him and Mr. Ellis himself, there's no claim of ineffective counsel. I said, I just can't square that with the law and with the facts. And so we're moving in a different direction, and we're saying, per se, if you've got someone who's racist against you, who you are, there's just no real way that you're going to get effective counsel. Same thing with law enforcement. There are biases that people may not even know about. We need to teach those things, especially implicit bias. It's like the case of the woman in New York City in the park who called police saying African American was assaulting her or trying to attack her, when in fact he was just asking her to leash her dog the way she was required to do under New York City laws. That's that kind of thing. And so let me just stop by saying that we have to be accountable, every one of us who is in law enforcement. At the same time, let's recognize that we have to teach and train because people are brought up certain ways, and trying to make sure they could see those things, those biases, can take some time.
Thank you. On the topic of teaching and training, don't you think we need more training for 911 operators so they can accurately convey the situation to police and also determine whether the situation needs psychologists, social workers, or police?
For sure, the training would go to 911 operators, to our law enforcement agencies. But how about we train the civilian community who's calling 911? How about we tell them that you're not supposed to be using 911 to say that your neighbor is making more noise at 9 p.m. at night than he or she should be. Again, at the end of the day, the operator answers the call. The operator didn't make the call. And so, yeah, we all have to go to school in making sure we understand these things. But I think the point there is, let's recognize what 911 is for, just as we need to recognize why do we use our police versus substance abuse experts, mental health experts. Let's all sort of go through that learning process so we do a better job, all of us, so everyone else, the professionals, can do their job better as well.
Thank you. This questioner says, can you please ask the Attorney General Becerra about the DOJ decision regarding Exide Technologies bankruptcy that affects several East Los Angeles communities like Boyle Heights, Commerce, and Bell? He said Governor Newsom has stated the decision that is wrong. It ignores decades of scientific evidence and is a dangerous decision that we are absolutely intend to appeal. Attorney General, how can you ensure our communities are a priority for the state of California to ensure our neighborhoods get cleaned up and Exide and Dtsc are held accountable for the lead contamination that has occurred for several decades?
Yeah, and I have to put this one in context, because when I served for 24 years as a member of Congress, I worked on this matter as a member of Congress. Many of the people who lived in my congressional district were impacted by the lead contamination that was caused by Exide in the southeastern portion of LA County. It's outrageous what Exide did in that community, in those communities, for so long. And it's now outrageous what the federal government is attempting to do in settling this matter with Exide by essentially letting them off the hook for pennies on the dollar of what they're supposed to do to clean up all the contamination they are liable for in our residential communities, in our business communities, affecting schools and homes and the rest. We are not accepting what the federal government wants to do on that settlement, and we are going to do everything we can to make sure Exide pays for what it did. It is frustrating to see this, and this is where, again, going to accountability. And I think we all have to recognize that if we don't ask for that accountability at the beginning, man, it is tough to get it later on. And it goes back to what Frederick Douglass said. If you don't start building strong kids now, if you don't start building safer communities now, the price you pay later on is unacceptable.
Thank you. This questioner says, thank you, Attorney General Becerra, for talking about the importance of prevention and early intervention services. Additionally, thank you for your leadership in talking about the importance of mental health and models to divert law enforcement response. Is there additional funding for these community-based mobile response teams at the local or state level?
There actually is money, and I'm blanking right now on the proposition that passed recently that provided, it was a homelessness proposition that passed recently that provided more money for homelessness. I think that if we used our money smartly to prevent, what we would be doing is not just trying to build a shelter for someone who might be homeless, but prevent them from ever becoming homeless. And so there are ways to do that where we can act to prevent. Look, I grew up with parents who would constantly remind me, es mejor prevenir que remediar, better to prevent than to remediate. And so to me, it's something that government can do well, but it needs to do it better. I mean, healthcare, clearly one example, why we would not have everyone in our country given access to healthcare to prevent them from getting really sick, where we end up having to pay a far greater price, is beyond me. but whether it's on homelessness, whether it's in drug addiction, whether it's in healthcare, mejor prevenir que remediar, better to prevent than to remediate.
Thank you. Oh, I think we lost him.
I recall he was concerned that his computer was going to take him off.
I know, I saw that notification. It looks like he might not be able to join us again because his computer is forced to restart. So yeah, we are just about at the end of the hour, so I guess we can go ahead and wrap this up, and I will have Kim join us, and I'll turn this over to the two of you. Thank you so much.
Jessica, you have been such a trooper. She had to jump on at the beginning of this broadcast because the network kicked me off, and I know the Attorney General was having issues. So Dean Segura, you've been a trooper too. It was such a wonderful and informative, important discussion. So we thank you so very much. And I also want to thank UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs as being a program sponsor and a great partner with us. So thank you so very much. We'll have to have you back for a full program and interview in the future.